All right, joining me now for this conversation about what's happening at the border are Russell Moore and Nicole Martin. Russ, Nicole, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to see
All
you,
right,
Mike.
to set this up for listeners to kind of catch up where we are. Last week, the Biden administration allowed something called Title 42 to expire. This is a section of the law that allows the government to temporarily block entry into the U.S. during a public health emergency. It was invoked in 2020 by the Trump administration, and it was in March, right at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's notable, it's worth mentioning, I think, that there was a New York Times report that showed that Stephen Miller, Trump's chief advisor on immigration policy, had actually been advocating multiple times before the pandemic to invoke Title 42 and close the border. So for a certain segment of the right, the appetite for this was in the air. What Title 42 did is that it meant that our asylum and immigration system was essentially frozen. It was essentially closed. And people who entered illegally were, as quickly as possible, returned to Mexico, often within a matter of hours. Now that it's expired, immigration and asylum are governed by something called Title 8. This opens the border again. It creates opportunities for immigration and asylum, but it also carries much more severe penalties for those who crossed illegally. So, for instance, if you're caught under Title 42, you're caught in the U.S., you're expelled right away, but there's no long-term consequences. With Title 8, there's a longer kind of due process to be expelled. But if you're caught entering illegally, you're banned from legal entry for another 5 years. In the build up to this, there's been a surge at the border in the weeks before Title 42 expired. Expectations were high that the surge would only get worse. Former President Trump, a few days before it, warned that this would be a day of infamy. It would destroy our country. But that actually hasn't panned out. I think a lot of observers have been surprised that the border crossings have actually gone down. That said, there's a real humanitarian crisis happening here. Border officials they're saying 14,000 people are crossing a day, that there's 20,000 people in detention facilities, and all of those detention facilities are over capacity. And there's another 155,000 migrants gathered at the border in places like Juarez waiting to cross over. So this has been a political hot button for a long time. You can go back to Trump's rhetoric. You can go back to the Obama administration and battles over the status of the Dreamers, children of undocumented people who were born here. We've also had in the last year these activities by Republican governors like Greg Abbott and Ron DeSantis, who were busing and flying asylum seekers to sanctuary cities like Chicago and New York or to Martha's Vineyard. But you also had Democrat governors in Arizona and Colorado who were doing the same thing at various points. Russell, this is an issue you've written about, spoken about for many years. When you think about where the church is on this question, how would you kind of describe the landscape and what's happening in the church right now?
Well, let me take it in two ways. I mean, I think we see something that's happening in the country, and then we have something that's happening or could happen in the church. When it comes to the country, I think that what we see at the border is an example both of what's wrong with America and what's right with America. And when I say what's wrong with America, I mean the fact that there really is no workable solution anymore when it comes to definitively dealing with this. Because for a long time, what many of us who've been working on this were working on is let's pair very tough border security with policies to be able to help people who are here already to find some pathway to making it right. It's very obvious now that those kinds of compromises and reforms just aren't going to happen anytime in the future that I can see. Of course, things can change really rapidly, but not anywhere soon in this environment. But it's also a sign of what's right with America. I mean, if you think about what Ronald Reagan used to say during the Cold War, it's a sign when the wall comes down, or even if people just think the wall might be porous, which direction are people going? And you don't have Americans trying to flee to Venezuela. You have Venezuelans and Salvadorans and others throughout Latin America who really do want a start at a new life. And when you I spent some time at some of these detention facilities on the border, talking to people. I remember being struck by asking a child there, "Why did you come?" And he said, "To get away from the tax collectors," which I had in my mind IRS agent, but tax collector doesn't mean that in that
Mm-hmm.
context. It means essentially a violent gang leader who's
Mm-hmm.
extorting money, which of course is exactly what tax collector is in the New Testament context. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Zacchaeus
Yeah.
was not an IRS agent. This is what he was doing: is extorting people with money, with threats of violence. And so, it's a sign of the fact that America still is exceptional as a place of hope. Where it comes to the church, is the church really has an opportunity to model to the rest of the world what it means to be a reconciled body, but not just a reconciled body where we bear one another's burdens, and that includes some of these very difficult issues. So I've said for years, people of goodwill can disagree about what are the specific policies that are going to fix the immigration system or the border system or whatever. What we really can't disagree about are immigrants themselves and people created in the image of God themselves. And the church has an opportunity to model that and to show that to the rest of the world.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Nicole, how do you think that's going? How do you see the church's response and how it's being received?
Well, it's an interesting question because I think immigration brings a clash, especially in evangelical churches, of two realities. One is the charitable abroad reality, where evangelical churches tend to be very generous and charitable, especially in missions with people abroad going in different contexts and serving those communities in those contexts. And at the same time, this apprehension, this fear that we have when that country comes into the neighborhood, moves in next door. And there's a bunch of research that kind of demonstrates that we have a different expectation for our neighbor, the person next door to us, than we do for the person overseas. So when I am serving the Guatemalans in Guatemala on a mission trip, there's a great deal of compassion. But when a Guatemalan moves next door to me, there's a great deal of fear. So immigration kind of brings those two realities together. How do I reconcile this fear that I have? Fear that comes from a wide variety of places. Fear for my own protection, fear for my job, fear for my children. How do I reconcile that with this desire that I have that I believe is driven by God to care for those who are in need? So immigration brings up those realities. And I think, it's really split. I think Russell said it well. I think there's a great deal of hope knowing that we are serious about this tension of a strong border and strong policies with great compassion, but also going back to Title VIII means going back to something that's been set years and years and years ago. And where will the actual change come in? Where will we see, don't just go online, but here's the way we're going to help you go online to do your application? Where will we see a sense of holding firm to what we say is a policy for entering this country, but also creating access so that people can use the systems that we've created? So I think it brings out the tensions, but I do think this is a time for the church to wrestle with a theology of the other, not just the other over there, but
Mm-hmm.
now the other who may be right here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and another good aspect of this is that, as a friend of mine was saying yesterday, if you look at all of the fear mongering about the
Mm-hmm.
hordes of people, the caravans, the whatever, you mentioned the health emergency and the way
Yeah.
that Stephen Miller and others, way before COVID ever happened, were wanting to use this idea of disease vectors, that these are
Mm-hmm.
diseased people bringing things into the country. We saw that with Ebola
Mm-hmm.
earlier, about a decade ago. That kind of fear mongering, it's really not working
Mm-hmm.
anymore
Yeah.
the way that it did. I mean, yeah, you have stunts that are going on of flying asylum seekers to Martha's Vineyard and that sort of thing. But this sense of the caravans are coming, they're going to destroy your country, that just doesn't win elections anymore. It
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
doesn't move people anymore. And so that's a reason to say, okay, well, maybe just your normal, regular people in the country, as opposed to your cable news enthusiasts, are
Mm-hmm.
really ready for something different.
Yeah, it strikes me. I mean, I think one of the things that we forget is the power of the story of the American immigrant. I mean, you look
Yeah.
at what's happened racially in America. You look at the growth of the middle class. You see a lot of second generation Chinese Americans, second generation Nigerian Americans, who are contributing tremendously to the economy, the innovation, the good things that are happening in the U.S. And what strikes me, I mean, it strikes me that at the core of a lot of the fear is this scarcity mindset that, you know, if we let too many people in, they're going to take our jobs. They're going to, you know, prices are going to go up. It's going to be, you know, where it's a matter of competition as opposed to being a matter of like, no, this is actually a contribution to the economy. And it's also striking, like there's cognitive dissonance, I think, in the moment where there is a lot of anxiety about immigration, and there's a massive job shortage, or there's a massive a worker shortage in the United States right now. You know, I was just at a restaurant, just a, you know, crummy restaurant the other day, and they needed 6 people to work. They had 2 people show up for work that day. So there's lots of dissonance around it, and at the same time, you know, to me the busing stuff that took place a few months back, it's very trollish. And yet there was something to me that came out of that where you saw this reactivity from the mayor of Chicago, the mayor of New York City, both of whom said, you guys got to stop this. We can't handle this. And in Texas, it's tenfold or 100-fold that they're trying to sort of manage the people. And to me, that doesn't speak to like the righteousness of using people like political pawns or whatever. What it does speak to is this is something that nobody seems to actually want to take action to fix. And it's like, if we want to have the border open, we want to have these people come into our country, then let's make sure that we have the capacity and we're able to the capacity to process people and to handle it properly. So there's not a 2-year long backlog, which is the average right now for someone's asylum claim to get processed. And then on the other side, again, this sort of scarcity mindset that just says no. And so you get the gridlock and we're stuck with this horrendous status quo. The people who suffer the most are people who are running from gang violence in Haiti, running from organized crime in Ecuador, running from the just total economic and political collapse in Venezuela. It seems to me once again we're in this place where fear and anxiety drive policy, and nobody wins. I mean, it's bad for everyone.
Well, and it's also good for everyone in the in the various ideological activist communities. I mean, that's one of the reasons why you really can't get anything through, because there's one group of people for whom it really is helpful for them with their base if they're able to say the country's under assault and about to collapse, and you know, so forth. We're under attack. And it's helpful for another group of people in an activist base to be able to say, we, you know, I remember we were trying to, we had the votes to get something done on Dreamers in about 2013, 2014. We had the votes to do it. And some of the, not all of them, but some of the activist groups who agreed with us on immigration were saying, no, let's kill it because we want to hold out for the whole deal. And we're able to say to people, if you vote to protect Dreamers right now, you're actually going against us because we want something massive. So there are people for whom the status quo really is in their interest, and it takes everybody else saying, no, we really can do something different than this.
Yeah. And I mean, don't you think it kind of taps into political ideologies also? And this is why I think it's so important to not allow your politics to guide your theology, but, you know, the other way around. But there are people who will say, well, it's the government's job to make sure that we secure the borders. It's the government's job to make sure that the process is right. But those same people are often saying, no, let's go for a smaller government. The government is too involved. The government is too engaged. Well, who's going to solve it? I mean, how are we going to work through this in a way where we do empower the government to work with us, for us, but also what's the role of the church and church serving organizations to step in? And I think I've been so encouraged by that when you watch, you know, the bus loads of people who are dropped off in crazy places like in Martha's Vineyard. You see the church
Yeah.
rising up to say, I'm here. We saw this same thing in Ukraine, where in Poland and in other parts of the surrounding countries, people were driving in their cars saying, just jump in and we'll take care of you. But that shouldn't be the only solution. So it's a good time for the church to wrestle if we choose to go into the issues that we need to be talking about.
Yeah, and this is one place where I think the church actually does get a bad rap, an
Yeah.
undeservedly bad rap. Because I know on the border issue, for instance, I would have to deal with church after church after church calling and saying, "We want to send people there to care for the people that are there. We want to, send our
Yeah.
disaster relief group to be
Yeah.
there caring for people." I have to say, "You can't do that. Government won't let you do that. There are other things you could do, but not that." So it's, in many cases, they don't know what to do, but they want to.
Yeah.
And that's a good sign.
Yeah. What on that point? I mean, what can churches do, and what can individual Christians do, and or what's happening? What are ways the church is contributing in meaningful ways?
Well, I mean, one of those ways is identifying asylum seekers and refugees and newly situated Americans or potential Americans in your communities and actually serving them. And I think churches are doing that all over the place. Nobody really pays attention to it, but that happens all the time. I mean, I'm in Nashville with a large Kurdish community, churches completely connected and caring for them. Same thing happening in Minnesota with Sudanese communities. And so just asking that question, who are the people around us who are there? I mean, imagine being newly in a place where you don't speak the language, your children are newly adapting to a place. People need not just sort of services and care, they need friends. And churches that can do that are really helping a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there are tons of organizations who are coming alongside churches to help. I mean, the number one thing, though, for me is allowing pastors to be equipped with the right information, pastors and leaders to be equipped with the right information to share with their churches. The challenge we have in this time is that pastors are either all politics and all policy every Sunday, so much so that it overburdens the congregation, or they're no politics and no policies any Sunday. So you have this kind of sad bifurcation that I come to church to either worship or be equipped, but not both. So there are great ways to be, equipped and for pastors and leaders to learn. I love what World Relief is doing, the ways that they have pathways to come alongside churches, pathways for individuals to join. There are tons of other organizations. I mean, if you just Google Christian immigration organization, you will find lots of options and opportunities, and you can find whatever works for your theological strain. You do not have to, join World Relief and agree with everything they said. You can be present. So I think it's information, and I think it's joining up with organizations who are already involved.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in on that too, because I think what both of you point at that's so helpful is to actually make a difference in something. You kind of have to get your head out of the national cable news way of thinking about this. These are local stories. These are local communities. These are individuals. These are real, ordinary people, and that's really the place where the church in particular can make such a difference. So, all right. Well, we will be right back.